Welcome to the Explainer. Look, we've all been there, right? You get that sudden, vague email from corporate, you're called into an unexpected all-hands meeting, and then you hear that dreaded phrase, "We're restructuring." Organizational change is this universal pain point in the modern working world. Some teams seem to just sail right through it. They adapt to new structures and they absolutely thrive. But others, they dig their heels in. They resist it literally every single turn, and team morale just plummets. Well, today, we're going to solve this mystery. We're looking closely at the secret mechanics of change, and specifically how leadership truly dictates whether a team sinks or swims.
So you really have to ask, why do corporate reorgs almost always fail? It's a massive problem. You'd think with all the millions of dollars spent on change management consultants every year, we'd have this totally figured out by now. But the truth is, most organizations focus purely on the logistics of a change. Who sits where, what software we're going to use, who reports to whom. And in doing that, they completely ignore the human mechanics, the psychological transition of the people who are actually doing the work on the ground.
And the fallout when we get this wrong? It's severe, and it comes with very real, data-backed consequences. We aren't just talking about a few people grumbling at the water cooler here. The research shows measurable, documented spikes in the intention to quit and actual absenteeism. We see increased stress and time pressure on employees, which directly leads to reduced productivity and, honestly, even increased healthcare expenses for the company. These are serious bottom-line impacts that make understanding the actual process of change absolutely crucial for any organization.
Let's dive right into Section 1, 2 distinct leadership styles, and identifying the espoused values.
Okay, so in our mystery of why change succeeds or fails, a manager's baseline style is kind of our first big clue. This is the foundation. It's how managers view their role and how they communicate their values to their team before a transition even begins. I want you to picture your own boss right now, or maybe a past manager you've worked under. On one side, we have transformational leadership. This is your visionary. They act as a role model, they inspire, they empower, and they give you individual consideration. They're always encouraging you to rethink conventional ideas. On the other hand, we have transactional leadership. This is much more about quid pro quo. It relies heavily on contingent rewards. You do X, you get Y. And managing by exception, meaning they usually only step in when something breaks or a specific metric needs to be met. It's a highly instrumental, transactional approach.
Now, before we weigh these two styles against each other, we need to clearly define our target outcome, followers' change appraisal. To bust through the academic jargon for a second, this simply means how positively employees react to, adopt, and evaluate a change. And this is important. It's not just about quiet compliance. It's about whether employees genuinely embrace new routines, whether they actively use the change to fix bad work methods, and whether they develop a truly positive attitude toward the new structure.
Moving on to Section 2, the Danish Workplace Study, Uncovering the Clues. To see how transformational and transactional leadership actually affect that change appraisal we just talked about, researchers Anne-Louise Holten and Sten Olaf Brenner went out into the real world. In a 2015 study, they tracked these exact mechanisms during actual corporate restructuring. And the crucial point I want to emphasize here is the scale. They tracked 351 followers, everyday employees living through this. This wasn't some tiny focus group or a completely controlled lab experiment. This is robust, messy, real-world data capturing the day-to-day reality of hundreds of people actively navigating a workplace transition.
What's also really interesting about this dataset is its diversity. The researchers didn't just look at one company, they looked at two completely distinct organizations undergoing team restructuring. One was in the public eldercare sector, which was predominantly female, and the other was a private financial sector company dealing with accountants and project teams. Having this diversity helps prove that the mechanics of change we're uncovering here aren't just limited to one specific industry or one specific demographic. It's a universal human dynamic.
But the true goldmine of this study lies in its longitudinal approach. They didn't just ask people how they felt on the day the change was announced and call it a day. No, they tracked them over a massive 2-year gap. Back in 2005, at Time 1, they established a pre-restructuring baseline of the leadership styles. Then, in 2006, the organizations actually went through the messy, ongoing implementation of the new team structures. And finally, in 2007, at Time 2, they evaluated the post-restructuring change appraisal. This timeline is huge because it shows us exactly how long genuine change actually takes to settle and evaluate.
All right, Section 3, the power of manager engagement, building the house.
So we've looked at the espoused values, right? That baseline transformational or transactional style. But what happens when the change actually hits the fan? Well, that's where we move to enacted values.
what does a manager actually do in the trenches during the transition? It creates this logical ripple effect. Initial leadership styles flow into active manager engagement, which then ultimately points to our final target, change appraisal. This proves that leadership isn't just some magic direct beam of light. It's a process. It has to travel through the active, daily, roll-up-your-sleeves engagement of the manager.
We can actually break that pathway down into 3 pretty simple steps. Step 1 is the foundation. The study found that both transformational and transactional leadership styles initially have a positive influence on engagement. So whether you're a big-picture visionary or a strict quid pro quo manager, having a distinct style gives you a platform to start from. Step 2 is the enacted actions. This is manager engagement. This means the manager is actively informing employees, they're sharing knowledge, and they're taking the time to outline personal impacts. And then step 3, the outcome. Because as managers actively engage, change appraisal significantly improves. Employees actually start to genuinely embrace the new methods.
Which brings us to Section 4, the long-term direct effects, the big reveal. Okay, so what actually happens when we jump across that huge 2-year gap from 2005 to 2007? How did that initial baseline leadership style directly impact how employees felt years later? Well, here's the massive twist in the data. Over the long term, transformational leadership at time 1 had a distinctly positive long-term effect on change appraisal. Being a visionary role model early on pays massive dividends years down the line. But transactional leadership at time 1, it actually had a negative long-term effect. I want you to let that sink in for a second. Even though transactional leadership might help a manager engage and hit immediate short-term tactical goals, relying on a system of rewards and strict compliance at the start of a major change actually hurts long-term employee buy-in.
The researchers really hit the nail on the head here. They noted that introducing a change process by ensuring compliance and consistency through rewards and exchange seems to have negative effect on followers' change appraisal. And what's so fascinating about this is why it happens. A quid pro quo approach is fundamentally instrumental. It completely fails to motivate people deeply enough to navigate the profound uncertainties, the stress, and the psychological weight of a reorg. You literally cannot bribe people into fundamentally changing their attitudes. It just doesn't work.
So just how powerful is this whole dynamic? Well, by mapping out this exact combination of early transformational leadership flowing into active manager engagement, the researchers were able to explain a massive 42% of the variance in why employees positively appraise change. 42%. In the complex, chaotic, messy world of human behavior and corporate restructuring, being able to pinpoint nearly half of the reason for success down to these very specific leadership mechanics is absolutely staggering. It's a real game changer for how we think about management.
And that brings us to our final thought for this explainer. When you are standing in the face of change, is your leadership style espoused or is it enacted? Are you just talking the talk about being a visionary, or are you actively engaging, informing, and guiding your team through the trenches? The secret mechanics of change, as we've seen, aren't found in some top-down corporate memo. They are found in the daily enacted engagement of leaders who inspire their teams to cross the bridge into the unknown. I really encourage you to think about your own workplace transitions through this lens. It might just completely change how you lead, or honestly how you evaluate the leaders above you. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.